Good morning, Year 8, it's Mrs Edwards. Welcome to your first lesson. So we're going to do a bit of a recap lesson to begin with on a topic that you looked at a couple of weeks ago, women getting the vote. I'm just going to see how you've got on and give you a couple of tasks to go with it before we start moving on to looking at Britain changing in the 1900s. So today your title is going to be Women Getting the Vote in Britain, and we're going to know and understand who the Suffragists and the Suffragettes were, and we're going to explain the influences behind women successfully getting an equal vote in Britain. And you're going to start to make some decisions as to which you think was the most important reason why women got an equal vote based on the lesson today, but also what you did a couple of weeks ago. So just to recap, I've pulled a few questions from some of the show you knows you've been doing over the past couple of weeks. So just pause the video here and have a go at these 5 questions. What happened in 1666? What year was slavery abolished in England? During the Industrial Revolution, what was Britain a leader in? What happened to the population during the Industrial Revolution? Who ruled the country during the Industrial Revolution? So pause the video now and have a go at those 5 questions. Let's see how you got on. So the Great Fire of London was in 1666. 1833 was the year that slavery was abolished in England. Science and technology was what Britain was a leader in during the Industrial Revolution. The population increased rapidly, or just if you had increased is fine. And who ruled the country during the Industrial Revolution? It was Queen Victoria I, hence the Victorian period. So first of all, I've got a source just to get us reminding ourselves what was life like for women during the 1800s. So this is a source written by Mrs. John Sandford in The Women in Her Social and Domestic Character. Notice that Elizabeth Poole Sandford, that's her real name, writes under her married name Mrs. John Sandford. Wonder why that could be. What does that perhaps tell us? So she put, a woman should make a man's home delightful. Their gender should ever teach them to be subordinate. Women are like children. The more they show they need looking after, the more attractive they are. So just pause the video now and just make a few notes. How does this source make you feel? What do you think it's trying to say about women? What's their role? What's their position in society during the 1800s? Okay, so hopefully you've had a look and you've had a think and you've put things like, so it's saying that they should be subordinate because of their gender. So because they are a woman, they should be subordinate. And subordinate is when it means that you sort of bow down to them, you do what they tell you, you don't really have your own voice. Okay, should make a man's home delightful. It's not saying that it's the woman's home per se, is it? It's saying it's the man's home and that everything should be to make sure that he is happy as opposed to the woman being happy as well. And it says women are like children. The more they show they need looking after, the more attractive they are. Okay, so they need looking after. Women can't do things for themselves. They need a strong man to look after them. And that's the perception of women during this time. This is what people are thinking. Okay, and hopefully you'll remember what the position of women was like in Victorian England from your lesson a couple of weeks ago. Okay, so Victorian women had few civil or political rights. A wife had to do as she was told by her husband, who was her protector and advisor. Until 1884, a woman was officially listed as one of her husband's possessions, like you might own an Xbox or you might own a phone. A woman was also listed as a possession until 1884, which wasn't really, when you think about it, that long ago. And in addition, women were expected to live up to an image of the perfect being. So beautiful, demure, loving, intelligent, women actively agreed with this attitude because they didn't know anything other. So they didn't really question it because that was how they'd been brought up, that was how they lived. So they thought that was how life was. And as the 19th century progressed, women were given a number of civil rights, including the right to vote in local elections. So they could vote in their areas where they lived and make a little bit of a change. But by 1900, they still hadn't been given the right to vote in parliamentary elections. And a lot of women were sort of wondering, why couldn't they? Why couldn't they get involved? The working man got the vote in the parliamentary election in the sort of late 1800s. So why could women not then vote by the 1900s? If they could vote in the local elections, why not in the parliamentary elections? And they started to question it more and more at this time. So in 1866, there was a number of women who took a petition signed by 1,500 women asking for the vote to Parliament, where two of the handful of pro-vote MPs presented it. And in 1897, various women's societies joined together into what was known as the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies, or the NUWSS. And these suffragists were, as they were called, campaigned peacefully for the vote. So in lots of areas like Manchester, London, Bristol, Birmingham, there were lots of little groups of women's suffrage groups trying to get the vote in their areas. And it was only in 1897, when Millicent Fawcett combined the groups, that she made the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies, or the Suffragists. And they had over 100,000 members. They had some male members, they had working class members, but the majority tended to be middle class women. And although the number of pro-suffrage MPs in the House of Commons grew, the suffragists didn't really get anywhere. They were quite slow, they were very methodical, they were peaceful. They wanted to meet, they wanted to greet, they wanted to sign petitions, and they were trying to, slowly make changes, but it was happening probably a little bit too slow for some. Because in 1903, we've got Sylvia Pankhurst, and she joined together in 1903 to form the WSPU, okay, or the Women's Social and Political Union, or as you might know, the Suffragettes. And they did it because they were really frustrated by the slow progress of the suffragists, and they thought, they're not getting anywhere. They've been trying, and still there's no way near getting the vote for the women. So they decided to form their group, and they could see that being violent was quite big news, and it made the headlines a lot, and people tended to listen. So they kind of seized that opportunity and went for more of a violent approach to getting the vote, whereas the suffragists were more of a peaceful protest group. And a couple of key dates that you've come across already, but just to remind you, between 1906 and 1913, 15 times there was a bill that was put before Parliament to give women the vote, so MPs could vote on it and decide whether they passed it and let women vote, or whether they declined it. And they declined it. 15 times it failed. So it was an issue that was being addressed by Parliament. They were aware of what was happening, and they knew that people were unhappy, but 15 times in those several years they failed the bill to go through. And then you've got in 1913 the suffragette Emily Davidson, who tried to bring the issue of women's suffrage to the Epsom Derby, a massive thing. There was lots of people there, huge crowds, royalty, and during this horse race she tried to place a ribbon on the King's horse in the Epsom Derby whilst the horse was racing, and unfortunately she was killed. And a lot of people say, oh, that kind of brought the issue to light, and she was willing to die, and she was named a martyr because she wanted to die for the cause. But then some people thought, oh, actually she's going too far. Women are reckless, they're too emotional, maybe they can't be trusted with the vote if this is the kind of thing they're going to do. So it was a big thing that happened, and it really divided people's opinion. And some people were more in favour for women getting the vote, but some people actually went, maybe women shouldn't get the vote. So what I would like to do is I'd like you to watch this video. Obviously you can't click on links because this is already on YouTube, but I've just shown you where you can find it. So if you search for Votes for Women Timelines TV, and it's on Timelines TV just here, you will see this short video. It's 8 minutes long. Okay, I'd like you to watch it. So you're going to pause this clip, go onto that video, and have a look and watch it. And as you're watching it, I want you to make notes, but then I would like you to answer these 3 questions in as much detail as you can. So why were women not allowed to vote? What actions did the suffragettes take to gain publicity? And what changed after August 1914? What happened? So make as many notes as you can and answer those questions. If you're struggling to get this clip, if you go onto YouTube, onto R. Taylor JFC History, you will also find a playlist there which has got this video in there, so you can go that way as well. So pause this clip and have a look and answer those questions. So the kind of main arguments for and against female suffrage are the following, which again you've come across in a lesson a couple of weeks ago. So the vote would give women a voice in a male-dominated parliament and therefore lead to further change. Many single women and widows had the same responsibilities as men, and women paid taxes just like men, therefore they should be allowed to vote. However, some people were very strong in this and said they did not want women to vote because they felt that women were not rational, they were too emotional to vote, and unfortunately that was proven in 1913 by some. And women are pure and should be protected from politics was another argument against giving women the vote. So there was lots of arguments. You've looked at the arguments you've yourself a few weeks ago in your lessons. I've read quite a few, it was lovely. You've looked at why women should and shouldn't get the vote, and you made a decision. And they did get the vote. And we're going to look at sort of 4 other key reasons why women got the vote. And as we're going through them, I'd like you to be making some notes in your books on these key things. And then I'm going to give you a couple of questions that I would like you to answer after, okay? So the suffragettes, as we know, a group of women who wanted female suffrage. They used lots of different methods, but the main method was using violence. Okay, that was their key thing, is they wanted to use violence. They made a big impact on British society and were often front page news that got them at the forefront of people's minds, and the fame brought the female struggle to every household. However, their extreme methods did split public opinion. The violence of the suffragettes could be argued damaged the cause of the female movement because it put more people off than encouraged. Even some women did not like the suffragettes as they believed that they were giving women a bad name. So make sure you've got a few notes on the suffragettes. We've also got the war, World War I. So as the men of Britain were away fighting in the First World War, there was a shortage of people to work in the farms and factories. Women from all backgrounds left their houses and went to work without complaint, and it could be argued that without the women, Britain may have lost the war. When some women were given the vote in 1918, almost every person who supported it in Parliament said they deserved it because of what they did during the war. The war gave women the chance to show men that they were responsible and effective members of society who deserved a say in how the country was run. However, it could be argued that giving women the vote was only a matter of time and the war just speeded things up. And finally, thirdly, we've got Sylvia Pankhurst. So she was the daughter of a very famous Emmeline Pankhurst, and in 1914 she took a group of working class women to meet the Prime Minister. And the meeting was a really big deal because it showed it was the first time the Prime Minister had met with such a group of people. It also meant that the women could show the Prime Minister that they were responsible. And it could be seen that the meeting was not so important because it was one of many meetings and he met people all the time, but some people say, well, actually he saw the women, he could see what they were like, he could see their mannerisms, he could see that they wanted this and they were willing to do anything and they could behave, and that made a big impact and change. And then finally we've got the suffragists, so the women that campaigned peacefully for the female vote. They wrote letters, they went on demonstrations, and their letters were sent and received by MPs in the PM, or the Prime Minister, which meant that their arguments were heard by important people. They were really influential and they showed that women could be both caring and responsible, and their letters made the campaign for the suffrage known. But some people would argue that maybe they were too nice and the letters and demonstrations were nice ideas, but largely ignored by male politicians who didn't really care. So by 1918, some women were given the vote. Men over 21 and women who had property or were married and were over the age of 30 years old could vote in 1918. It wasn't until 1928 that full voting rights were given to women. Okay, so they didn't actually get the full vote until 1928, which is very different to what was happening in other countries. For example, in Germany, by 1920, men and women over the age of 21 were able to vote in their elections. So Britain took a little bit longer, and there's lots of different reasons, as you can see on this slide, as to why women were starting to get the vote by 1918 and then fully by 1928. So using this information, I want you to make notes on the kind of the 4 main reasons why women got the vote that I've just gone through. And then in your exercise books or on your piece of paper, can you explain which you think was the most important reason? What was the most important reason that women got the vote in the end by 1918, but also fully by 1928? What do you think was the main reason? And then would women have got the vote without the First World War? So if the First World War hadn't have happened, do you think women would still have been able to have got that vote? Do you think it would have been passed in 1918, or do you think perhaps not, or do you think it could have been sooner? Okay, I want you to have a think, and I want you to have a go at answering all those questions. Now, if you want, you can move on to the challenge and the extension question as well. So using your previous learning that you've done on suffragettes and suffragists and women, can you put the actions that they had onto a timeline? So the key dates and the key things that happened in a timeline in your book, and then mark, maybe just explain in a couple of sentences, where you think the turning point would be for people to begin to let women have the vote. So pause the video and have a go at those tasks now. And just to round off, can you have a go at answering these plenary questions? And you will find the answers to mark them in your fact book. So have a go at these 5 questions, answer them in your book or on your piece of paper, and when you've finished, have a go at looking at the answers in your fact book and see which ones you got right, which ones you got wrong, and make sure you revise them ready for our lesson next week. Thank you very much, Year 8, and I'll speak to you next week. Bye.